The most dangerous wounds are those inflicted by hands we once trusted. In the shadowy recesses between loyalty and treachery lies a question that has haunted humanity since time immemorial. What makes someone a traitor? The rain pelted against the windows of Dr. Eleanor Blackwood's office on the 32nd floor of Meridian Tower. Outside, lightning split the Manhattan skyline, illuminating the city for fractions of seconds before plunging it back into darkness. Inside, the celebrated psychologist studied the file on her desk with unwavering focus, the storm a fitting backdrop to the case that had consumed her for months. The Jensen betrayal, they called it in whispered tones at the bureau, a network of carefully placed informants, decades of intelligence compromised, and at the center of it all, a man everyone had trusted implicitly. A traitor is not always the one who sold you out, Eleanor murmured, recalling her grandfather's words. More often, it's the one who pretended to be on your side while acting as your enemy. She glanced at the photographs pinned to her evidence board. David Jensen, decorated intelligence officer, family man, trusted advisor to 3 directors. His smile never wavered in any of them, not at his daughter's graduation, not at the medal ceremony, where the president himself had commended his service, not even in the surveillance footage captured 3 days before his disappearance. The most unsettling betrayals rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning signs or dramatic declarations. They simmer beneath the surface of everyday interactions, masked behind familiar smiles and comforting words. Like the imperceptible shift of tectonic plates before an earthquake, they move silently until the moment everything collapses. Consider how easily we're deceived in our daily lives. The colleague who enthusiastically supports your project while secretly undermining it to superiors. The friend who listens to your dreams, only to ensure they reach fulfillment before yours. The partner who says forever, while already planning their exit. Each scenario represents not just a breaking of trust but a fundamental questioning of our ability to discern truth from manipulation. Friedrich Nietzsche captured this unsettling reality when he wrote, "The enemy who despises you is more honest than the friend who fears you." The philosopher understood that open hostility at least offers clarity. You know where you stand. But betrayal thrives in ambiguity, in the space between what is promised and what is intended. Eleanor turned to her notes on the psychological profile she'd been developing. Jensen didn't fit the traditional patterns of treason. No financial difficulties, no radical ideological shifts, no blackmail material they could uncover. What then drives a person to betray everything they've ostensibly valued? Modern neuroscience offers intriguing insights into the traitor's mind. When researchers at Cambridge University conducted fMRI studies on individuals engaged in deceptive behaviors, they discovered something remarkable. The neural pathways associated with moral reasoning showed reduced activation, while those linked to reward anticipation lit up intensely. More disturbingly, longitudinal studies revealed that the brain adapts to deception. The emotional response diminishes with each successive betrayal, making it progressively easier to betray again. The psychology of betrayal operates on multiple levels. At its core lies what specialists term psychological displacement, the ability to rationalize actions that contradict one's stated values. A traitor doesn't see themselves as villainous. They construct elaborate narratives where their actions become necessary, even righteous. Dr. Robert Hare, renowned for his work on psychopathy, noted that the most dangerous betrayers maintain a compartmentalized sense of self, allowing them to function in contradictory roles without experiencing cognitive dissonance. The mind creates firewalls, Eleanor had written in her case notes, between the self that betrays and the self that believes in loyalty. The rain intensified as Eleanor studied the timeline of Jensen's activities. The pattern was there, but something was missing, a crucial element that would explain the why, not just the how. She reached for the worn copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War on her desk, flipping to the passage she'd highlighted years ago. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Isn't that precisely what betrayal accomplishes? It defeats from within, conquering without a single direct confrontation. As thunder rolled across the sky, Eleanor paused. What if she had been approaching this all wrong? What if betrayal wasn't simply a moral failure, but a survival mechanism evolved over centuries? Historical records show that in times of occupation, some collaborators who betrayed their countrymen genuinely believed they were minimizing greater harm. During World War II, certain officials in occupied territories argued that their cooperation saved lives, that would have been lost in futile resistance. Could betrayal, in some contexts, be an adaptive response rather than an ethical collapse? The question sent her mind racing down unexplored avenues. She pulled out Jensen's psychological evaluations from 15 years earlier. There, buried in the standard assessments, was a trauma narrative she'd overlooked, an incident during his first field assignment, where his strict adherence to protocol had resulted in the deaths of 2 assets. The report noted his subsequent comment, "Sometimes the rules protect the institution, not the people." What if Jensen's betrayal wasn't a betrayal in his mind, but a correction? What if he had redefined loyalty to encompass a different set of principles? This perspective shift doesn't excuse treachery, but offers a more complex understanding of its origins. The boundaries between loyalty and betrayal blur when viewed through different ethical frameworks. The whistleblower who exposes governmental abuses is simultaneously a traitor to their organization and loyal to broader democratic principles. The employee who breaks ranks to challenge toxic corporate practices betrays company solidarity while honoring professional ethics. Eleanor had interviewed enough traitors in her career to recognize a pattern. Almost all believed they were the heroes of their own stories. The transformation of our understanding requires acknowledging this complexity. Perhaps the binary of loyalty versus betrayal fails to capture the nuanced reality of human motivation. Instead of asking who is the traitor, we might better ask what competing loyalties are at play, and which ones should take precedence. This framework demands more from us than simplified moral judgments. It requires examining the systems that create conditions where betrayal becomes a viable option, environments where speaking truth directly carries unacceptable costs, where power imbalances distort relationship dynamics, where institutional values contradict human needs. As Eleanor contemplated these possibilities, her secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed her direct line to the assistant director. "We found him," came the terse voice on the other end. "Small coastal town in Portugal, living under the name Michael Clark. Do you want to know the strangest part? He's been helping refugees, people fleeing the same interests we believe he sold information to." The contradiction hung in the air between them. "I want to make the approach," Eleanor said firmly. Alone, 3 weeks later, she sat across from David Jensen in a small cafe, overlooking the Atlantic. The man before her had aged considerably, silver threading through his once dark hair, lines etching deeper around his eyes, but his gaze remained clear, unflinching. "They sent a psychologist," he observed, stirring his coffee. "Not tactical. I need to understand," Eleanor replied simply. "Understanding requires context," Jensen said after a long pause, "and context is precisely what was missing from every briefing, every directive. We created monsters with our half-truths and sanctioned betrayals, Dr. Blackwood. I simply stopped participating in the larger betrayal. By betraying your oath, by honoring a more fundamental one." He placed a flash drive on the table between them. "Everything is here. The operations that were really human trafficking, the intelligence gathering that amounted to corporate espionage for private interests, the necessary sacrifices that were anything but necessary. Like water reshaping stone, betrayal transforms all it touches. The betrayed are never the same. Trust becomes a calculated risk, rather than a natural extension of relationship. The betrayer is altered too, marked by their choices in ways they often fail to anticipate. And those who witness betrayal absorb its lessons, consciously or not. Perhaps betrayal is not an anomaly, but a mirror, reflecting the contradictions within our institutions, relationships, and selves. The colleague who betrays may be responding to a corporate culture that betrays its stated values daily. The friend who betrays might be enacting patterns from relationships where their trust was systematically violated. The partner who betrays often betrays themselves first, abandoning their authentic needs, until deception seems the only escape. This perspective offers neither easy forgiveness nor righteous condemnation. Instead, it presents a more challenging path, understanding betrayal as a symptom of systems and relationships that have already failed in fundamental ways. As Eleanor studied Jensen across the table, she recognized the metaphor taking shape. The traitor stands at the fracture line of our social contracts, pointing to where our collective promises have already been broken. They are both perpetrator and symptom, both warning and wound. "What happens now?" Jensen asked, his voice steady, despite everything hanging in the balance. Eleanor considered the flash drive, the file waiting to be written, and the competing loyalties tugging at her own conscience. The path forward wasn't clear, but clarity itself was perhaps the wrong expectation, in a world of complex loyalties. Now, she said finally, we face the harder truth, that betrayal is rarely the disease, but rather the fever that signals something deeper is wrong. Outside the cafe, waves crashed against ancient rocks, gradually reshaping them as they had for millennia. Eleanor thought of how water, patient, persistent, could transform even the hardest stone, not through force, but through constant presence. Perhaps understanding betrayal required similar patience, the willingness to witness complexity, without rushing to judgment, to see the systems that shape individual choices, to recognize the humanity in even our most difficult moments. The traitor reveals, not just their own character, but the character of what they betray, and in that revelation lies the possibility, not just of judgment, but of transformation. As Jensen began to speak, telling a story more complicated than the simple treachery they had assumed, Eleanor listened with the growing awareness that betrayal, like loyalty, is rarely what we initially believe it to be. Both exist, not as fixed states, but as ongoing negotiations between competing truths, competing needs, competing versions of who we believe ourselves to be. The storm that had followed her from New York had cleared, leaving behind an uncertain sky, neither completely clouded, nor fully clear. It seemed an apt reflection of the moral landscape they now navigated, where the line between traitor and truth-teller, between betrayal and bravery, had never been less distinct, and perhaps that uncertainty itself was the most honest place to begin. In examining the phenomenon of betrayal, we encounter a fundamental paradox of human connection. Those with the power to betray us are precisely those we have allowed close enough to do so. Strangers cannot betray, they can harm, attack, or disappoint, but betrayal requires a prior investment of trust that transforms the act into something more profound than simple injury. Throughout history, societies have reserved their harshest judgments for traitors. Dante placed them in the ninth circle of hell, buried in ice at the very center, with Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius suffering in the three mouths of Satan himself. Ancient Germanic tribes drowned or buried traitors alive in bogs and swamps. The lingering power of these punishments reveals betrayal's unique capacity to destabilize not just individual relationships, but social orders. Yet modern understanding complicates these traditional views. Psychiatrist James Gilligan, who spent decades working with violent offenders, observed that many acts of betrayal stem not from inherent evil, but from shame, so profound that destroying trusted relationships seems preferable to continuing to experience one's diminished self within them. The traitor, paradoxically, often betrays from a position of perceived weakness rather than strength. The neuroscience of trust illuminates this dynamic further. When we trust someone, our brains release oxytocin, creating not just emotional, but physiological bonds. Betrayal doesn't just break social contracts, it triggers neurological responses, similar to physical pain. fMRI studies show that the same brain regions activate whether we experience a broken bone or a broken promise from someone we trusted deeply. This biological reality helps explain why we find it almost impossible to think clearly about those who betray us. The cognitive dissonance between what we believed and what we now know activates threat responses that prioritize self-protection over understanding. We create simplified narratives. The traitor was always malevolent, was never truly known to us, was fundamentally different from what we perceived. Yet the truth remains more complicated. Consider the case of Elizabeth Bentley, an American who spied for the Soviet Union during World War II, before ultimately becoming an informant for the FBI. Her initial betrayal of her country came not from ideology alone, but from a complex mix of personal connection, her relationship with her handler, purpose, feeling part of something larger than herself, and validation, being valued for her intelligence, in ways American society, at the time, rarely valued women. Her subsequent betrayal of her Soviet network emerged from similar needs. When those relationships deteriorated, was Bentley, twice a traitor,